Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another video analyzing one of my favorite scenes from the work of Stephen Erikson. I've done at least one scene from all of the main 10 books of Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I did one scene from The God Is Not Willing, I did 3 scenes from Forge of Darkness, and today we're finally looking at a scene from Fall of Light. If you want to check out any of those other videos, go for it. They're all in an appropriately labeled playlist over on my channel. I will say that this video today, this scene in question, contains very, very light spoilers, really just for the whole premise of what the Kharkanas prequel trilogy is all about. So it's really, any spoilers will be really broad, general stuff, not even as spoilery as what's on the back of the books. The scene that I'm talking about today is at the beginning of Chapter 8, from pages 289 to 295 in this Bantam Mass Market paperback edition. The house guards, Prazek and Dathenar, working for a certain noble family, they have been reassigned, and this scene consists primarily of a conversation between the two of them, between Prazek and Dathenar, as they ride through the countryside to their new posting. They both consider the destructive nature of civilization and progress, the mistreatment of the peasant classes and other disenfranchised communities, and most importantly, the absolute absurdity of war. So, here we go. The two horsemen rode out through the thinning forest. The day was cold, the sky clear but dull, as if hidden behind a veil of soot. They were slumped in their saddles, the horses walking, and, as ever, the two men were engaged in conversation. "A most high court, a most select education, and see what it brings us, Dathenar." Dathenar rolled his broad shoulders beneath the heavy cloak. "Every bridge is but an interlude, Prazek," he said. "The arc and the span held more worth than we imagined on that dread night of our faltering. We should have stood fast at our station, scowling in each direction, back to back, and so facing all manner of dire threat." "Dire threat indeed," Prazek said, nodding. "The treacherous wind gusting so foul and portentous. The unleavened night, bitter as black bread. Fend us, too, Dathenar, from wretched imagination, all our own, and the venal thoughts of irate commanders prone to dancing on our bones. And if we still be clothed around our precious sticks, muscle and gristle bound to honorable purpose, well, that is faint distinction. You speak ill of Selchus' ruin?" Prazek worked with his tongue at something stuck between his teeth, somewhere near the back, and then said, "I've seen white crows with softer regard, and indeed am known to fashion a pleasant disposition from their glittering beads." Dathenar reached up and rubbed at his bearded jaw. "You liken us to carrion, and our lord's brother to the winged arbiter of every battlefield, but bleached of hue, you say? In war, I wager every field is aflutter with black and white, foe and friend, all those hostile comments and unpleasant looks, and laughter the kind to make you shiver. In all, a misanthropic place, ill-suited to civil debate." Okay, first break here. So the scene is set. These two men are sent on a new assignment after failing to stand guard on a bridge. And they've already started to expose their kind of style, their conversational style a little bit. One will say something, then the other will kind of do his best to wait around and eventually construct a pun or flip the previous statement on its head in some way. But what I find so engaging and fun about these two is that no matter how ridiculous the wordplay or banter gets, they're both extremely agreeable, at least with each other. And with this duo, I think Erikson is comfortably letting the facade of character slip a little bit, and he's just being honest that his characters, especially in this book, often work, mostly their main job is to deliver theme. So even though this scene is funny, it's one of the most straightforward to pick apart as far as themes go. And so Prazek and Dathenar, they begin talking about white crows and black crows, a very on-the-nose reference to how Triss has basically made it easy for everyone in Corald Galen to identify with one side or the other, whether it be the Taistandi or the Taispliosin. But Prazek and Dathenar know that this is ridiculous and that such a stark divide could only really exist in metaphor, and Erikson knows that a metaphor can, in this genre, be transformed into a reality. So really brilliant stuff. But now let's really get into it, as these two basically go step by step discussing how a civilization grows and gets to the point where peasants are called to fight for their lords and ladies. Here we go. I've heard tell, Prazek said, of a time when we were gentle, fresh upon the land, behind us some sordid path spewing us out from some forbidden tale of misadventure. But see these majestic trees, we said, such clear streams, a river like bold sinew to bind the world. Why, here were pits studded with ore, bitumen for the fires, soft hills to welcome sheep and goats. Even then, I suggest, said Dathenar, there were crows of white and crows of black, to keep things simple. Prazek shrugged, still trying to dislodge whatever was jammed between two molars. Simple enough for the flames in the forge, the night sky filled with sparks and embers. Simple, too, for the columns of smoke and the sludge to foul every pool, every lake and every stream. Why, we were avatars of dark even then, though we knew it not. But still, let's look back on those gentle times, and take note of their myriad instances of gentlest murder. Destruction is known to thrive in indifference, Dathenar said. We are in sleep, calmly, and indeed comely, committed to our placid repose. As you say, these are instances of gentle mayhem, ruckled and ruined, and blissfully innocent, the hands gripping the axe. Weapons needed forging, of course, Prazek said, nodding and then spitting. Civilization's demands are simple ones, after all. Unambiguous, you might say. It is only in the boredom of Corrald Galen's advanced age, such as we find here, that we tangle the threads, nestle in agitation, and upend our civil simplicity, our simple civility, and like so many turtles on our backs, we flinch at crazed scenes on all sides. And so you long for simpler times. Just so, white crows upon one flank, black crows upon the other, and every field a battlefield, and every enemy a foe, and every comrade a friend, decide upon the handshake and dispense with mangling complexity. I long for the rural, and thus the rural finds you, brother. Okay, another break here. So they're talking about a vague, simpler time, but all the while, they're pointing out how even in that time, there were still some arbitrary divisions to keep things simpler. There were still white crows and black crows, but those arbitrary divisions are what are, at present, leading people to civil war and destroying this kingdom. Anyway, moving on. Leaving behind the last of the tree stumps and spindly saplings, they rode out upon the track leading into the hills. Ahead, denuded rock outcroppings and sweeps of winter-dead grass made a rough jumble. It finds me with cruel vigor, Prazek said in a growl, chased by chills and stiffened leather, chafed of thigh and carbuncled of joint. He then pulled off his worn glove and reached into his mouth. A moment's effort, and he pulled free a shred of old meat. This, too. Simple maladies, Dathenar easily replied. The complaints of peasants. Prazek pulled the glove back on. Well, peasantry defines itself in that miserable self-regard, and now I find myself a purveyor of mud and unheralding skies, no different from said peasant in my squinty eye and cheeky tick. And were my feet upon the ground, why, I'd shuffle one or both to nudge along my slow thoughts. Simpler times, Dathenar agreed. Musings on the weather can fill a skull with clouds, enough to reduce every horizon. It's well you shuffle a foot or two, if only to lay claim to the ground upon which you stand. The threadbare fool knows well that stony soil beneath him, Prazek retorted, and so too observes the passing of armies in column, the tidings of smoke above the trees, and flotsam in the stream. He raises a damp finger to gauge every new wayward sigh of the wind, too, then bends once again to shoulder the wrapped bundle of firewood, and sniffs at the smell of plain cooking adrift on the breeze. His wife has paced her cage all day, wearing ruts in the cabin's floor. No certainty that pacing, Dathenar said. Why? She might be sharpening stakes, or, deadlier still, whittling. She might be tending a babe in a crib and humming country hymns to pastoral idle. Ha! In tending that babe, Dathenar, she notes the wooden bars of the tiny cage, and then perchance glances up to see the same writ large about her. Yes, she might indeed be sharpening stakes. But her husband's an honest man. See his battered hands and blunted finger-nubs, the old scars of youthful zeal, and the limp from when he miscalculatedly addressed one knee with a hatchet. Oh, those were wild times back then. Hi-ho! And in such demeanor, why, his idle thoughts hum a somnolent buzz, kept in beat by his plodding boots on the muddy track. Okay, another break here, because now they moved on to talking specifically about the peasantry, and I think they're both needling and kind of poking fun at all of the stereotypes that make up that class. Also, there's a little bit of gender normativity, patriarchal kind of commentary in that passage I just read. Anyway, moving on. You paint a generous picture, Dathenar, but come the summer, a company rides up to gather in the wretched fool. They shove a spear into his hands and wave flags, be they dark or light, crowned or crown hungry. They take the wife, too, if no crib proffers necessity. Our outmarching in column, Prazek, reduced to simple thoughts pertaining to weather, aches, and the season's gentle turn, at least until arrives the moment of terror-strewn mayhem, spears all a-clatter. Dathenar grunted, frowning. But wait! Where are the glittering heroes waving their swords in the air? What of the stirring speeches, such as to awaken the zeal of mind-wandering farmers and herders? See them stand in that ragged row, feet shuffling. One or two, as befits the moment. Forget not the squint and tick. And the limp, too, Prazek added. They tilt heads as the windbag rides back and forth on a confused horse. This way? Yes. No. That way? What madness afflicts my gouty master so eager to straddle me? Dathenar, enough of the horse thoughts, all right? They were brought to mind by our charges, with their ears flickering to catch every word we utter. My humblest pardon, brother, I beg you. The horse, back and forth. You were saying? Okay, just a great comedy bit right here about the horses, but as always, we can read a little bit deeper. The conversation at hand is really about how abused and misused the peasantry is, regardless of whether or not Prazek and Dathenar personally feel that way, and I think they might. Erikson is pretty clearly using them to just get this critique across. But then Erikson lets Dathenar express concern for how the horses are confused and treated in battle. And that could be a whole other critique of violence and warfare in its own right, with all of those animal abuse implications. So I like to imagine this is Erikson basically saying, oh, something like, we could get into a lot of other tangents on this topic, but for now, let's just kind of rein it in, keep Prazek and Dathenar on topic with the peasants. Anyway, moving on. The king's speech. What king? The king's speech. What king? Whereof comes this king of yours? Prazek cleared his throat. Well, let me amend that by saying this. A king in his own mind, or indeed a queen in her own mind. It's a crowded skull, to be sure, lofty with minarets and teetering with towers, sparkling with spires, all so grandiose as to beggar any beggar. And see the selfsame monarch marching this way and that up and down the echoing halls with the rustling tapestries. Why, a scion of self-importance, he wears the headdress of a high priest this moment, and a jeweled crown the next, the robes of the judge, the clasped hands of the humble penitent, the bared head of the husband, and the godly penumbra of the father. Is it any wonder that he casts coy glances at his reflection in every mirror, so inviting to worship and adoration this man? Or woman, Dathenar interjected. No, he is not a woman. She would be a woman, but not him. Okay, this is easily one of my favorite jokes, I guess, of the whole scene, really demonstrating how, at a moment's notice, these two seem to be more concerned with kind of clever wordplay and banter than they are with the actual, like, kind of more serious topic that they're talking about. Also notice how Erikson builds to this joke very well. He lets Prazek begin the paragraph talking about kings or queens, but then Prazek slowly switches to only using masculine pronouns, talking about fathers and husbands, and by the end of it, just in time for Dathenar to correct him, say, what about women? Only for Prazek to snap back with the smartest bit of wordplay, I think, in this whole passage. I love how it's done. Anyway, moving on to the battle at hand, and the speeches, of course, the speeches. Pray get him and us out of his skull, Prazek, and attend to his stirring speech to the peasant soldiers. Easier said than done, Prazek replied. Very well, since we two are so busy, so thoroughly distracted by all the noble thoughts implicit in our noble bearing and whatnot, taking little note of peasants by the wayside, we've seen none. No matter, they exist in principle, I'm sure. Let's hear this call to war. Yes, why not, Dathenar? A moment, while I compose myself. I see a week, at least. My dearest soldiers, my beloved citizens, my wretched minions. Dathenar tilted his head back and yelled, We're here, sire, summoned. Press ganged. Your pardon? Press ganged into your service, as if tithes weren't enough. You, peasant, what was that you mumbled? Nothing, sire, I but await your speech. Dearest instruments of my will, howsoever I will it, and I will. Now there's a chilling promise. We are gathered here upon the eve of battle. Best make it dawn, Prazek, we're nearing the hills. Upon the dawn of a day promising glorious battle. Permit me to elaborate. The battle is yours and the glory is mine. There will be no confusion regarding this matter, I trust. Excellent, you are here and you will fight in my name for one perfectly reasonable reason. To wit, because you are not over there upon the valley's other side fighting in the name of him or her. In other words, you are here and not there. Is that clear then? Sire, sire. What is it? I have a brother who fights for him or her over there. That man is no brother of yours, fool. But our mother. Your mother was a whore and a liar. Now, where was I? Dathenar sighed. We were being stirred into inspiration. Prazek waved a hand. I hold high this sword, my kin, my comrades, and with it do point that way towards the enemy. And where my sword points, you follow. You will march, yes, and when close enough, why, you will charge. And if you prevail, I will be pleased, and further pleased to send those of you left alive back to your shacks and barns, if you please. But if you fail, I'll not be pleased. No, not at all. In fact, your failure will mean that I'm likely to get my skull cracked open, spilling into the ditch, minarets and towers and spires, all tumbling every which way, crowns askew, robes besmudged, bared head laid bare, through and through, and alas, godliness snuffed out like a guttered candle. Just so, was that succinct enough then? Now we march to war. Okay, a beautiful mockery of a speech, I think, that I'd say both is and isn't foreshadowing the ending of this book, but I could probably take a whole separate video to talk about how fed up with violence and in the genre, how fed up with violence in the fantasy genre I think Erikson is with this book, or maybe not Erikson, but at least Blind Galand, the narrator, is so frustrated with all of these stories of warfare. Anyway, moving on to close out the scene. With this strident challenge ringing in the air, the two men fell silent, both slumping a bit further into their saddles, until Dathenar sighed and said, Never mind the peasants, Prazek, and let's speak instead of prisoners. A touchy subject, Prazek replied, of crime or duty. Your distinction reeks of the disingenuous. In this mud, no distinction is possible, and we not yet upon battle's field. Prazek stood on his stirrups and looked about, eyes narrowed. What now, brother? Somewhere, lying in the grasses about us, is a pillager of prose, a looter of language. Dathenar snorted. Nonsense. We but ape the noble cause, my friend, with hairy discourse. Settling back down in the saddle, Prazek scowled. Let us defy the ghost, then, and ride on in silence. I must prepare, in my mind, my stirring speech to my prisoners. You'll win their hearts, I am sure. I need only their swords to cheer. Yes, Dathenar grunted. There is that. A short time later, a score of crows winged out from the hills and made their way overhead, seeking the distant trees. The two officers exchanged a look, but, for a change, neither spoke. Okay, and I think this passage ends on a bit of a bittersweet note. They are clearly having some fun, even though what they're talking about is very serious. And their consideration for the peasants, and seemingly their next topic will be the prisoners, in this course of historic wars and legends, is a consideration that Erikson has been practicing in all of his writing. And so through studying social history, or history from the ground up, I think Erikson would argue that through that analytical lens, we can start to point out the hilarious absurdity of the ruling classes and the great men of history in all their decisions to violently simplify their worlds. And Erikson employs two witty comedians, Prazek and Dathenar, to deliver this beautiful, powerful message. All that said, I love this scene, I love this book. If you enjoyed the video and haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I should have 2 more scene analysis videos coming out in the next week here about moments from near the end of Fall of Light. So I hope you'll all be looking forward to those. Anyway, all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye.